All right, so it's 5 after. What time do we have till, Herschel?
Yeah, you got I think 12 minutes left.
To start?
No, to end.
Oh, okay, cool, perfect.
No.
So thanks for coming.
Please start.
Think about your editors.
You have, you're scheduled to 1:45, but we have a half an hour after.
Oh, we got plenty of time. We're good to go. Yeah, no problem. All right, get rid of this because that's just gonna choke me and it's gonna get weird. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started a little bit as people kind of filter in and things after lunch. It's always a fun time being the first session after lunch along the way. Appreciate everyone coming to learn more about the editorial experience along the way within Drupal. In terms of this session today, we're going to talk a bit about understanding the shift for editorial UX and understanding why we want to do that. Talking about why this matters, a little bit about how contrib is going to help us out along the way. Some different kind of custom considerations we want to do for this as well. Thinking past where we're at now, where do we go from here in terms of editorial experiences? And then from there, just a little bit of how do I do this in general, more of a business case. So everyone's been kind of asking already this morning what the demographics are in the room about different experiences and things like that. I'll skip all that fun for us today and pretty much say that we're going to cover basically from site builders to business to developers in this session. So we'll cover all different aspects of it. In terms of on those different areas, just as a high level for a site builder, how you can do this with contrib and how you can do this through just individual configuration and different things you can think about there. As a second part for developers, a little bit of the custom things we can do to be thinking about along the way. And then third, from the business side, why do we want to do this? Why as a company do we want to invest in actually making the editorial experience better? So those are we'll hit all three of those demographic areas along the way. A little bit about myself. I'm Basarab. I'm the Director of Development at MediaCurrent. So I've been in media and MediaCurrent now for about 6 years. I came from the editorial side of things prior. So I was editor at the Florida Times Union up in Jacksonville, doing sports editing before we had a CMS, and built into how do we build CMSs for them. From that kind of evolved me into actual development and actually building of the CMS from that perspective. So for me, when we're building sites, we want to make sure that we're always thinking about the editor experience. We're not just thinking about what it looks like on the front end, but hey, what does the editor, what is someone using the site actually going to be looking at and seeing along the way? So real quick though about MediaCurrent in general. So MediaCurrent is a full-service digital agency. We're specializing in open source software solutions, everywhere from design, strategic solutions, development, all different aspects of the pipeline along the way. We're headquarters in Atlanta, but we're spread out across 26 different states for employees. And just as a shameless plug, because that's what you do at Drupalcamps, we're always looking to hire, especially right now in terms of front-end developers, project managers, and third one is, what's the third one, James?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, but those two, strategists. Dawn will hate me for missing that one. But yeah, definitely front-end developers, project managers, and strategists along the way. Definitely trying to expand out those teams for us. So if you're interested, come see myself or anyone else from the MediaCurrent team along the way later today. So jumping in a little bit from there, let's understand what the shift is. Why are we talking about this today? What are we kind of looking at of editorial experience, shifting editorial experience and UX to that side of it from the front-end side of things? So design and marketing, we've all seen that a lot before. Those designs and those things are updated early and often throughout our process. We always keep up the front end of our website to keep up with current trends, different things that are happening along the way. We're always rebuilding that consistently. But at the same time, we're not rebuilding our CMS every single time we do that. So we want to make sure we're having a CMS that keeps up with those changes, and we're focusing on the end users that are using our systems in the end. When we're doing that, the content editorial experience is getting lost a lot of times in favor of the end user experience. So what people are actually accessing when they visit our websites, we tend to focus on that, make sure that's perfect, and then say, our editors, whatever, we don't really care about them. That's not really the right thing to be thinking about. It can be argued that in reality, our editorial users are spending more time on our site than our end users in general. Most of our end users are coming to our site. If our site's done well, they're getting what they want. They come in, they leave, they go on with whatever they're looking to do. If our site has different things coming on, they'll come back a couple more times. But pretty much they're coming in, getting what they need, and jumping out. Our editors have to live in this day in and day out all the time. And then when we think through, take that to another level, if editors are in the site all the time, who's actually creating the content for your site? Who's actually building what your site is saying to your end users? Those are also your editors also. So if you think about that, our editors are the voice of our companies in general. So if we want to make sure that we're keeping them happy, we want to make sure that they're working in a system that makes them feel the best, generate the best content, which in turn is going to generate the best return on investment for your end users as well. So before we think about that and our editors now, what about competition? What about other CMSs that are on the marketplace? What are we looking at out there, and what have people had experience in? So in the general sense of Drupal, there's three main competitors we tend to think about. That's going to be the site cores, the AEMs, and the WordPress, or 10 to ones we look at. WordPress has kind of fallen off a bit more recently, especially in the bigger enterprise space. It's been more of the site core and the AEM side of things. But when we think about editorial experience, people tend to say that they're more editor focused, but there's also other things out there. There's new systems coming out, like the API first contentful distribution along the way. That's something that comes out and is very much focused on just the editor experience. It doesn't do anything on the front end. So it's going to have more ability to build in that editor experience. But then also our editors are coming to our sites from other sites in general. So they might have come from a Drupal experience. They might have come from a contentful or something like that. But a lot of times they might be coming from something that we don't think about, like a Medium or a BuzzFeed, and they're used to things like that for writing their editor experiences. So we shouldn't be comparing ourselves just to what Drupal's done or to what our main competitors are doing. Think about where our editors are and where they're coming from. What kind of systems are they working in? And what kind of things can we take from them to build into Drupal along the way? But in the end, with all of those, everyone has a CMS in some way. Does anyone ever like their CMS? I'm sure no matter what CMS of all these that you see up here, people have used, people hate some aspect of it. So why do people not like CMSs? When we think about Drupal, we all know about how complex Drupal might be day to day. When you start Googling the Drupal, if you do why is Drupal, you get a bunch of random results of so complicated being the very first one along the way. I know this can change, alter around some. We did this in incognito and things like that to get it as accurate as we can be. But why is this such a normal paradigm that we have to think about along the way? Why do we accept that our CMSs are a terrible experience or that our editors aren't going to like working in them? It shouldn't be something we need to think about, or why on that side we need to think about from that perspective. So things in Drupal that people think are bad can also apply to any other CMS as well. So take a minute to think about your CMS or another CMS you might have worked on in the past. What kind of things do people not like about that? Are there things like, are there too many fields on a form? Is it too convoluted? Maybe there's too many workflow steps. Maybe it takes too many required fields to get content published out. All of those things affect Drupal, but they can also affect any other CMS. It's how you implement and how you think about it along your architecture that affects how your editors can actually interact. So all those different things, like too many fields, convolution, things like that, we can solve all this with WYSIWYG, right? I mean, it's Word. Editors know Word. Everyone knows Word. It just solves all of our problems. I mean, we don't need to do anything else. I can just say, let's just do this, and we'll leave this right here. We're done. But in the end, WYSIWYG isn't great for these newer experiences that are coming. We're going to talk a little bit later on about more future experiences that are coming down the pipeline, things that are already starting now. What about decoupled interfaces, things like that? What about non-web apps that we might be doing? Our CMS isn't just doing a website anymore. It's powering all sorts of things. Our website and our Drupal interface is powering your refrigerator or other things along the way. What about individual web services? This idea of create once, publish everywhere that NPR and whatnot have done really well over the years with doing. What we want to try and do is keep our display logic out of the individual data. As soon as we start embedding things in WYSIWYG, yes, there's a way to tokenize that. Yes, there's a way to get things out. But it's still not as easy as a concept for actually making structured data. So that leads us to the other side. Well, if not WYSIWYG, how are we going to actually combine content together without just making it a mess of more fields? We can do that, but we can also think about how to make that easier for the editor along the way. But when you think about that side of it, who cares? Put the editor out there. Put the WYSIWYG. It's not something we're dealing with right now. Just give them a WYSIWYG, whatever. Move on with life. But it can be tough sometimes to see why this matters in the end, and what you want to do and why you want to build this up. So from the room, I said we were going to talk about the three different areas. I'm assuming, without doing a thread, that most people in here are developers or site builders along the way for the concept in here. But as a developer or a site builder, you're not really seeing what the editor does on a day-to-day basis. You're interested in hitting certain deadlines. You're interested in making things happen for what the client's needing on the front end. You don't really care. You want good data models. You want things to be nicely pretty on the database side and interacting well, not really caring how the editor is interacting day to day. But we got to remember we're on the same team and we're both invested in each other's success. So we have to make sure that our content creators have the tools available to them to create the content on as many different platforms as they desire and make sure that's consistent along the way and not confusing for them on that perspective. We have to think content management and not website management. We're making sure we're focusing on the content, not the website as a whole, because that content is not just going to live in your one spot. That content's going to live on to lots of different areas as we go. Your CMS becomes a source of truth for all avenues of media consumption, often now. As we mentioned, all sorts of non-web devices, things like social networks, websites are tending to power. So we have to think about the content creation, and then also, as we go into there, the content management. How do we search for content? How do we update content? How do we not just make things the first time, but how do we keep bringing that up, especially for evergreen content along the way? Efficiency in our editorial tools equates to efficiency in our content production, which eventually should equate to more reach for our content as well as more money for our business. So if your users or editors are having trouble navigating the site, if they're having trouble using the CMS, if they're even going to external solutions to get what they need done, then we're not doing good justice for our team and our editors along the way. So we're going to talk today about an individual client that I'm not going to name, but all content right now for them is consumed and scheduled in one single Google spreadsheet. What if we could take that and build it to another level and actually bring that into Drupal? What if we could do that? We can increase our efficiency even more. Every time we do something, we're actually making our editor experience better. We don't want our editors going crazy. So in this particular example, this company has editors in every national city in the US. They've had international editors. There's over 300 to 400 editors across the entire company interacting with different things. So if we take that, we're not talking about just supporting a team of 4 editors that are going to learn your system inside and out. There's freelancers. There's people that are coming in brand new that are used to a BuzzFeed or a Medium. They're publishing over 100, 150 pieces of content a day. So we have to make sure that these things are very efficient. And when we go to that scale, every little bit matters in terms of time that an editor spends. So let's do a little bit of math. Each different piece of content that's created on a day-to-day basis has probably 3 editors touching it. You've got your individual reporter, an initial edit, and a second edit along the way. If you're shaving off just 1 minute at a time on the article creation, you could save at least 5 man-hours a day probably on actually doing that creation of content and focusing on more content you could create or other things you could be building for the site. When we as developers and site builders often think about performance in general in terms of the front-end experience. We talk about shaving off seconds or milliseconds of the site and doing all this types of code to shave off 2 or 3 milliseconds to our site end. Do we ever do that for our content editors though? When they're in there doing this 50, 60 times a day, if we shave off 1 minute at a time for them, what does that equate to in a day or a year for them over the course of things? So if we're able to do that, we're now able to invest our money into the actual editors, what they're doing, and actually creating that content that's creating revenue for us in the end. So we want to do that, keep the tools out of the way of the editors. So we have a system that we talked about with this particular client that had their own custom-built solution for actually generating content. It was this editorial tool, and when we had that, editorial time was very, very high. Developer time was also very high because we're creating and updating that content along the way. That meant editors weren't very happy. They're spending lots of time editing articles. Developers are spending lots of time maintaining custom code. No one's really happy in that instance. A creation of a tool came out quite a few years ago now. This tool would be in Drupal 6 actually, and it's got React on top of it to basically build a paragraph style system in React on top of Drupal 6. So take your Wayback Machine back there. This tool comes out, editorial time plummets. Editors are actually able to create componentized systems very, very quickly, but developer time is still skyrocketing because we're maintaining custom applications, doing lots of different things along the way. Also, because we're customized so much on top of Drupal 6, we're stuck. We can't upgrade anything. As Angie was talking about earlier, we want to still be on the mainstream of Drupal. We're not getting security updates. We're not able to upgrade. We're not able to go to Drupal 7. Drupal 8 comes out. Not even thinking about Drupal 8 right now. So how do we end up building that and be able to focus on not just fixing bugs, but actually adding new features for our editors and actually keeping up with where things are going from there? How do we keep the tool out of the way of letting the editor create new and cool content along the way? So we update the site to Drupal 8. we're able to take paragraphs and actually go ahead and create a system that pretty much mimics the React system, but with strict contrib and custom content. This is kind of a GIF, whatever you want to call it, of the old editorial tool on the left that was React and Drupal 6 to the new tool on the right of Drupal 8 and Paragraphs building this. Maybe? Let's see. Not on this screen. Oh.
Yeah, too much.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So comparing the two, it's very, very similar that you can see, but we're not building any custom code now. We're all built within Drupal 8 and actually built with contrib first. Well, that's great, but in the end, we want to make sure that let me take a step back there. Why do we actually matter with that? CMSs shouldn't be rebuilt every 2 years or so. Again, we're talking about what Angie was talking about earlier. How do we keep building for the future? And if we're locked into a Drupal 6 or a Drupal 7 or building these crazy custom solutions, we're kind of locking ourselves in often. Drupal 8 will be better for that, but at the same time, we want to make sure we're thinking about contrib first and using that. We also want to know that front-end technologies are moving very, very quickly amongst the different platforms and shouldn't be the main focus of your CMS. So even though Drupal now is looking at React and Core, we still should look at how do we build stuff with contrib and then build on top of that and not just do our own custom solutions. React on a paragraphs level is a great idea still. That Drupal 6 solution was way ahead of its time. But how we could still achieve a lot of what it was doing with Drupal 8 and contrib out of the box. So the next logical step from there is making that experience even better and moving from there to a contrib space. It seems like every week there's some new game-changing JavaScript framework popping up along the way. And we want to always be thinking about what can we do to build our CMS for the future also. So looking at that, what type of things can we do? Look at contrib. I've mentioned it already a couple times. Contrib will rescue us all the way. This is where the site builders really come in handy here. How much is out there in contrib that we can use for actually making our editorial experience better? So like we were talking about before, developer time was used mostly to maintain this old system. They were just fixing bugs, not really doing any new features. We're able to introduce now a paragraphs module and not really any custom code on top of that. And now instead of actually focusing on maintaining buggy custom code, we're able to just focus on adding new features. So in the past, we had editorial time and developer time skyrocketing up. We go into a new tool, it's React on Drupal 6. Editorial time goes down, but developer time skyrockets. We now move to Drupal 8 and go into using contrib first. And now both editorial time and developer time go down at the same time. So Paragraphs is pretty much that go-to solution for any component-driven solution currently. There's some new things coming out, like the layout editor you saw a little bit earlier. We'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, we want to think about what is Paragraphs in general, because I don't want to make assumptions that you know what that is already. So Paragraphs is a way of taking components, building a flexible page layout without relying on individual twig templates and lots of individual customizations along the way. So what we were able to do for this site in particular is take Paragraphs and bring its own set of problems and contrib and patch those contrib solutions to make it better than what the core out-of-the-box Paragraphs has. So we took the baseline Paragraphs, we patched it to allow inline additions of paragraphs between content. For this particular editorial system, as we were talking about, it's pretty large scale in terms of the number of editors. Also, their articles and their pages have hundreds of components. So there could be one page that has 150 different paragraphs on it. So that's really a pain if you, out of the box, click add a new paragraph or a new hero or something, and then you have to drag it up 75 paragraphs higher. So we added in inline adding between the individual paragraphs along the way. This is kind of a little demo of what that looks like out of the box. This is in the issue queue already. It hasn't actually hit the actual Paragraphs module yet, but there is an active issue queue on it. I did see the other day there's a drag and drop edition for Paragraphs as well to help with that dragging up of content. Now that that's landing, this can come up next as the next priority for them along the way because we actually have the drag and drop capability in. But we also had lots of individual paragraphs too. So we added in another contrib module called the Paragraphs Browser, which actually allows you to not just see one giant list of paragraphs, but contrib them into a nicer grid form. This is just showing all the paragraphs at one time, but you can search down of them, as well as you can break this up into individual filters as well. So you can categorize your paragraphs along the way and make it a little easier for your editors to find what they're looking to add to the site. In general, you don't want to add too many paragraphs to your site and give your editors too many options. But on a site like this, there's a lot of legacy things that had to be maintained. So how do we actually make sure we let the editors see things in a good way. So, what other contrib things can we do besides paragraphs? That's not the only thing. We're building sites for a lot of different clients and a lot of different things. Paragraphs only takes care of one aspect of our site. What about all the other editorial experiences we can talk about? So, one, when you have individual forms, things like the autocomplete deluxe module are really great rather than the Drupal core out-of-the-box autocomplete. This will give you a little more suggestions and options along the way. It also, one of the benefits I really like about this one is it lets you filter and see what your text is that you're actually showing. So in Drupal out of the box, you just have kind of a comma separating these autocomplete fields. It actually gives you a much better visual reference of what that term is, especially for editors that aren't used to using internet and CMS. Things like the inline entity form is another option you can use, which will allow you to add entity references and maintain that nice developer data model while giving your editors everything on the same page for them to edit things. As well as if you're going to use things like the WYSIWYG and inline content there, things like the link it module, so that editors can kind of search for content within your system and link to it, rather than go out, find a URL, and actually paste that URL in. It'll actually maintain a good relationship to that content for you. Other things we can do for our editors, media. Media in general has been one of the most notoriously bad parts of Drupal in the past. It makes me cry often when I look at the individual media sites for us along the way. So contrib has really stepped up in that realm, and it's actually been moving into core. So in 8.4, the media API hit core. I believe it's in 8.5. The actual UI is coming in place at that point as well to help build this further. But you can do all that now out of contrib. So things like the entity browser module allows you to really bring up content and actually search for media and reuse media along the way. Things like the focal point module is something I always recommend for sites so that you can handle image cropping logically. So many times on various sites you have all these different aspect ratios of images, and if anyone's done where I came from on a sports editing experience in the way back side of things when I started, basketball shots are terrible to work with because you got vertical shots and you're trying to crop them into a middle ground, and then Drupal out of the box is going to crop that in a terrible spot that no one wants to see. So using focal point to actually focus on people's faces makes you good crops and doesn't make you have to maintain lots of different aspect ratios for all your different images along the way. You make one edit to your image, say where the focal point is, every aspect ratio goes from that point forward. In addition, we can kind of utilize other modules such as the multi-upload using Dropzone.js. In the past, in Drupal 7, this would have been through Plupload module, but now Dropzone has kind of come in to let us upload lots more media at one time. And let people configure things as well. So taking all these different modules is still that concept of we've got 5, 6 different type of contrib modules and we're configuring them together. Things like Acquia Lightning or different distributions actually focus on this as well to help bring those individual media assets together for you a little bit easier. So we also don't want to forget about the general admin experience. So if you're not used to the individual admin form, it can be kind of overwhelming with all the different fields and things there. So if you're not using the sticky and publish to front page options that come out of the box in Drupal, because really how many people are day to day as much, you can look at the override node options module to help get rid of those for you and take things out that the editor doesn't need. Getting editors to content faster, looking at the menu per role or admin toolbar modules. Create custom menus for the different roles in your company so that they can get to what they need quicker. Admin toolbar brings you drop downs into your menus as well, so you're not having to click 3 times to get to one individual location along the way. And that really helps you eliminate lots of different clicks for your editors and saving that individual time. The add minimal theme is something we look at. It's almost required as a base admin theme now. There's lots of different things out there for different admin themes, but that one in particular is something we've found has stood out quite a bit, and probably really the only justifiable admin theme right now to use on individual sites. Though there's lots of work being done in other contrib areas to help try and make new ones as well to help build things up. Building user dashboards is something that's really useful. There's a total control module that's not quite there for D8 yet, but it helps you actually build up individual dashboards similar to the menu per role. Get the editors what they need simpler and not make them dig through the cruft of Drupal. They don't know what the Drupal config and menu system is and how things are organized in Drupal. Put what they need in a logical way on dashboards for them. A way to help with that also is using something like the login destination module. It's not D8 stable, at least last time I checked this, so that's why I didn't put it up there. But that's something that'll redirect your users as soon as they log in to one of those custom dashboards or something logical for them to look at, like a My Content page or something of that nature. And then finally, you want to control your node forms with the field group module because you want to be able to keep field vomit under control. Nobody wants that along the way. You don't need like 200, 300 different fields on your site. So make sure to get rid of that with field group module and kind of give some more organized chaos to you. But contrib is only getting you so far. You still need some custom considerations to get things going even further and take it to the next level. Why are these custom? Why aren't these contrib? Well, mainly because it really depends on your situation. Some of these probably could be moved into a contrib setup, but it really helps you to think about the custom considerations along the way. So what are some do's and don'ts? So we don't want to make editors remember fallbacks. So put fallbacks into pre-saves. What do I mean by a fallback, for instance? So oftentimes on sites that I'm building or we're building in general, we have a headline that's in Drupal and the title field. Well, that's not necessarily something you want to show on your homepage of your site because you don't have room for a 10, 20 word different headline that you might do. So you usually have a short headline field or something for the homepage of your site. Oftentimes you also have a teaser image or a homepage image for a teaser image for promoting content that you might not necessarily want on the full content display. So from there you can use pre-saves so that an editor doesn't have to remember those, and it makes logical defaults for you as you kind of go backwards in time. So for example, when you have that title, if an editor doesn't fill out that short headline field, when you save, just automatically in a pre-save, copy your title over to the short headline field. And now when an editor comes back in and they want to edit something that's on the homepage, they already see the title there. They don't have to remember, oh yeah, this field's empty, it goes back to this field, and then we don't have to do the logic in our display rendering. We can keep all that within one interface. So example of that also is using logical defaults within the other pieces of content. Taxonomy is a great way to do this. Users are writing articles. So if there's a user that always writes article about cute little puppies, then let's set the article category to cute puppies instead for them, if that's something that we can build from their user profile. If we can understand what they're writing for, let's set defaults based on what they're doing on the article screens or on our node forms along the way. For example, another thing to do is if you're uploading a video, maybe we automatically determine the aspect ratio of that video instead of relying on someone to set it. Anything we can do to take our custom code or our custom content that our editors are doing and extrapolate more information from it and keep them from doing other things, we're saving them time, we're saving them effort, we're letting them focus on the content experience. We talked about caption inheritance. We want to make them, what we do want to do though is make them think about what content is best for this field. So don't make the editors think about how the content's going to be displayed. Think about what this field says and make content for that. The more we can take editors out of the concept of, I'm going to make this and it's going to just show up on this page, on this desktop, the better we're going to be because we can now use that content across everywhere on our sites. And we do want to eliminate unnecessary actions also. Required fields, additional clicks, going to another page. We don't need any of that stuff. We want to keep editors in our pages and building things from there. So if someone wants to create content very fast, don't make them have 20 required fields on their site. That's going to frustrate your editors. It's going to make them, they just want to get something published. You're getting in the way of that. If they screw it up and don't put something required in, we should have good error checking in place. But also, they'll see pretty quickly that the page doesn't look how they want it, and they can go back and fill out that information. We can, with custom code there, is give optional validation. So give them a warning and say, hey, you might want to fill in this field because it's going to make your site look this much better, but don't necessarily stop them if they want to keep moving forward. Inline entity form we talked about was a good way to do that too, to keep them from going from other pages. Using custom paragraphs, this is something that you want to think about as well, making sane paragraph layouts. So we can use something like the NA clone module to make templates for our paragraph layouts. So if you have an article and you want 4 specific layouts that people normally use, make templates for that and then use the entity clone module so an editor doesn't have to remember, oh, I need to stack this paragraph on top of that paragraph on top of this paragraph. Build it so that it's logical for them to build from there. We also want to make sure that we're building out individual sane paragraph structures along the way. So don't make ourselves invest and go into paragraph inception of paragraph within a paragraph within a paragraph within a paragraph. Separate your layout and your paragraphs. Try to not go more than 2 layers deep, and that 2-layer idea is pretty much usually on a slideshow or a carousel or a gallery or something like that, where you just have the gallery and then some images that you want to put some captions into. Make sure to keep those layouts separate from your content and keep it sane and don't make people go too deep. Parameterize your content versus freeform. It's easier to set content, easier than it is to set displays when you're doing that. If you do want to change some things around, class variation is a great way to do this. The classy paragraphs module allows you to put a field on a paragraph and add a class to your paragraph output for display. Now your front-end team can actually go and make a different look to that without you having to create 3 different paragraphs to do the same thing. And then thinking about paragraph variations in general from that, think about caricatures of paragraphs as well. So use the display renders on your admin experience to show a view of that paragraph. If we think back to our GIF earlier of showing the scrolling, the editor could see what that content kind of looked like. It wasn't an exact representation of what it looks like on the website, but it shows kind of what things look like and allows you to get a feel for it without someone saying, well, it looked like this on the admin, but doesn't look like this on the front end, or when it goes to a mobile site looking totally different. It gives someone an idea, but doesn't lock them into what it's going to look like in real life. So what about in the future? How do we think past this? What's going on? What we're doing now is really, we're talking a lot about websites right now. How do we put the content in? Where does it go from here? Why do we need to worry about this for the future? So things that are coming is preview and context. Think about that rather than the in-context editing. So what I mean by that is similar to the paragraph caricatures I was just talking about. How do we show content in a caricature or in a way to visualize it without actually going to inline editing? I avoid saying inline editing because, as we talked about earlier, decoupled interfaces, things like that. We're not always going to be, when we're doing inline editing, we're usually doing it on a desktop. Most of our users aren't viewing a site on a desktop. They're not viewing in that same context. So how do we make sure we're showing things in the context of people looking at it? Stop thinking about you're making just an article. You're making content, and that content's going to be consumed from lots of different locations. Ajaxify your content along the way. Keep the editor on the page. Things like inline entity form that we mentioned. Don't show what you don't need to the editors. Hide the stuff and guide them through the process of what they need to do. Keep the editor within the page. And then maybe in the future thinking of things, what about decoupled editing? That's coming down the pipe. Card stack, Contenta, things like that are coming to make experience even different in the future. What do we need to think about in those perspectives? Keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward on different things. Layout initiative is another one we talked about earlier. Angie brought up. I haven't done a lot of digging into that, but it's another area that's evolving within Drupal, and how do we kind of think about that moving forward and using best practices there. So, as we continue thinking to the future, lightweight mobile first editing is something we want to consider. Our editors aren't always going to be on the desktop. How are they going to? Someone's always going to have that content they created. They're going to call at 11:30 at night, and someone needs to make a quick change to the website. How can they do that from their phone? How do we think about even further things about that? What about capturing images direct from a phone's camera and uploading directly in the Drupal along the way? Those are things we want to be thinking about toward the future in terms of mobile experience editing. The Drupal's admin theme is already mobile friendly, but our overall experience that we're building, are we building widgets that aren't mobile friendly? Are we building things that aren't going to be able to be used on mobile devices? Things like autocomplete don't necessarily work as well on mobile. Drag and drop don't necessarily work as well on mobile. People are on consumers are on mobile. Editors are eventually going to get there as well. Looking at the site we were working on, this is actually the actual editor's Google Analytics, so people that are actually working on the site on a day-to-day basis. You'll see a lot of people are on iOS doing editing. They're also on Windows and desktops as well. But you will notice that almost 50% of sessions are on mobile devices. And then one poor soul that was on Nintendo Wii, and that editing was probably not a very viable editing platform for them. I don't think they made a good impression on that side of it. We don't want to really worry about that person, though, in the end. So what else is coming to the future when we think about editing? I've mentioned quite a few times already, we're not just doing things for our desktop or our mobile site or our website. What things are coming along the way? Things like Alexa, we're already doing work on that already in terms of voice recognition and voice commands. Google Home is another way we're evolving that voice recognition. HomePod just came out this week as well to delivery. Things like the Oculus and VR is coming out, and we have to think about where our content goes into VR as well. Things like drones, your content might be actually helping to power drones or working through them as well. Smart fridges, I mentioned that earlier too. Drupal can power so many things with its web services and content. How do we build things up from there? The company that we're talking about today does dog collars and actually doing some content specifically for dog collars and working some stuff around there. Even things like Google Glass. Anyone remember that? Maybe not. Probably not that one we'll be doing in the future, but kind of moving through these ones and other things we'd be looking at there. All this content's already being made on a lot of different sites. How do we kind of think about that in our editing experience as well as the desktop experiences and mobile experiences? So, wrapping up around there, how do I actually do this? What do I do to actually make this happen? We've talked a lot about the individual pieces that build to that. How do I actually do this along the way? The biggest thing to think about on this whole system is to talk to your editors. The editors are going to use the experiences no matter what you give them. And they have to use whatever you're giving them. So they're going to have the best insight into what actually is bothering them day to day. you as a developer, you as a site builder, you even as a business analyst are going to feel like you know the right things to do for them. But in the end, what they're actually doing might be more important there might be certain pain points you're not even thinking about. Some tiny little thing that you think is just minuscule, but they're doing it 50 or 100 times a day, and it's driving them crazy. You might be able to fix that in 5 minutes. And that's going to go a long way to building that editor trust rather than just building this big new thing that that you might be thinking about. But you want to be prepared with that is to iterate and continue improving. Have meetings with the editors weekly, bi-weekly, something of that nature. Show that you're willing to help their concerns, as well as making sure that things that you're doing for the long term are also getting in. So communicate when releases come out. What concerns of theirs got fixed in this release? What things are now coming to the future that build upon those? Making sure to build up that trust and that communication between your editors and your development teams. When we think about this, how about our bosses? What do we do from the business case? We want to make sure that we're spending less time on development and editing. And by doing that, we're actually able to now make happier and more productive editors. When we're doing that, we're able to now produce more quality content. And if we're producing more quality content, we all make money at that point. So when you do all these, you're reducing the feedback loop, you're reducing that developer frustration, and you're kind of moving on from there and making a better editorial experience in the general sense of things. That's all I've got. A couple minutes to spare. Does anyone have questions along the way?
So, when your plan says this part of how you, is it a budget item for a client, or is it something that you look at? Because I saw that a lot of that is contrib. So it benefits Drupal as a whole. So, I guess who is paying for this? My question, but at what point do you decide?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you decide who's paying for this? Where's the budget lines come up? How much do you spend on actually working on the editorial experience? And the answer to that really depends on the client. But in theory, if we're doing this at the beginning and thinking about from the ground up, it's not adding much cost to our sites because especially with the things out of contrib, we're able to think about just logical things of what our editors are going to use. And we're actually saving time because rather than just focusing on what we think as a developer at the beginning, and then at the end of the project, the editor's being frustrated and everyone not happy about what the experience looks like, if we're talking and building things from the beginning that way, we're able to actually make that built into the process. So a similar example to that would be something like accessibility. When you're building that from the ground up, it's much easier to build into the process and not spend a lot more budget by doing it, rather than retroactively going back to adding it. So there is going to be a little bit of an increase likely, but if you're doing it, you're likely going to save time in QA, UAT periods and actually bring that cost back in terms of user happiness using the sites as well. Follow up, yeah?
So in the ideal world where the editorial experience is perfect, do you see that being contained within one admin theme that is only uses admin theme, or do you see that as being enough part of the contrib code that no matter which admin theme you use?
Yeah, so the question is this editorial experiences part of one admin theme, or could it be part of the contributed code out as well to other areas so that any admin theme could really use it? And really it depends. I foresee most of that being something that's contrib that could move to any admin theme. Right now, we haven't really seen that in Drupal because we're only pretty much using one admin theme. And a site, similar to your actual theme on the front of the site, you're not necessarily changing that day to day. You're not changing your admin theme out very often. So. But having the same baselines, using the Drupal coding standards, Drupal coding abilities at that point, and things like their theming functions and things like that will actually help make that translate between the admin themes much easier. You're really focusing on what the functionality is and reducing that rather than the actual look of what it is in the end. So making, again, logical defaults, things like that along the way. Other questions? Yes.
Kevin, you talked about paragraphs and showed some examples of different types of paragraphs, UX. I think for people that are really involved, you see the promise of paragraphs and maybe doing just distinguish that as a content tool and also as a layout tool. But there's a clear paradox between empowering the editor to create great content and maybe have some layout flexibility and separation of the layout from the content. So how do you think about that when you're doing paragraphs architecture?
Yeah. So thinking about how do you make the difference between layouts and content structure as well, and making sure you give editors some flexibility with a paragraph-based system, and what kind of ideas do you have around that, is what I think you're asking about. So what I think about there is, again, keeping the same paragraph structure and not making everything layouts and everything content within the same paragraph. So if you're doing specific paragraphs that are a 2-column different layout, or a layout paragraph that you have a 2-column block and then laying individual paragraphs into that, you're going to start getting into paragraph inception at that point. And it's going to get really confusing really quickly of like what kind of works where. What I tend to look at in that perspective is use your components and a component-based structure and how you're building the individual pieces out. So we talked about the classy paragraphs module earlier. It's a great way to think about that because now you can take a paragraph or a component, and you can have a full width version of that. And an editor can choose a drop-down list on the classy paragraph that says full width. And your theming team makes sure that when that class is there, it's actually in a full width look. But if you have a half width for it, you can actually make that say half width left maybe, and it can go float off to the left, and then maybe there's a half width right that would float to the right, and things where it does come a little confusing is like those are still stacked vertically in the admin, so you have to kind of picture them coming up. But it gives you that flexibility to do that without making tons of different variations and without doing paragraph inception of lots of paragraphs on top of each other. You can actually take that to another level and take that select list, theme that away, and make that into almost little wireframed templates of what those individual layouts look like, and make your editors not even know what a half width is or a full width. You can just click the one that looks like what they want. Is that right? Connor?
So basically a follow-up to that with Debbie. When you're working with sites like this, what is your preferred way to theme these? You know, are you decoupling these? Are you doing what you just said and letting Drupal render the page? Are you doing custom templates?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we actually theme these pages? And it's a bit of a mashup right now. We're still evolving that over time. But right now we're using KSS style guides. So you're building the component, and that paragraph matches up to a component in the style guide. At that point, what we're doing through Drupal is using as many field formatters as we can within Drupal to pass values over into the twig template from the style guide. And that way, you've got a parity between, I've got this content style guide here that I can see demo content on, and that same template is now used out on the live site to keep that consistent and clean up the markup along the way. We're experimenting a bit right now with UI patterns module to try and make that even more based on the Drupal baseline, because things that we run into sometimes they have to think about if you're doing things like a style guide is cache tags and clearing caches out, because that can sometimes get lost as you're doing pre-processing and things like that along the line. And one of the benefits of Drupal 8 is the big pipes, the caching and clearing out specific things so that your editors can see content faster on the site as well. So that's where we're trying to think and use as many field formatters as we can and break that down further instead of just one big component that's all pre-processed. Anything else? Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone coming. If you need anything, I'll be around here all day. You can find me on all the networks at Basarab, as well as on any of the Media Current social network following. So appreciate you guys coming out.